Partnered with the Public Health Service. Same issue we've been dealing with for the last 30 or 40 years in the Park Service. Too many visitors for the capacity of the environment to handle it. And anyway, we studied a lot of composters and dehydrating systems that were available at the time, and Rocky was one of the pilot parks. And the environment here is Longs Peak primarily. We'll go to Gem Lake tomorrow. Okay. The red button or the
forward arrow with the texture on it. It's forward, backwards, laser.
Oh, I see it. Okay. There we go. Okay, so Longs Peak, 14,259 feet. Gets up over 40,000 people a year try to climb that. Very highly seasonal. It melts out on the summit about July something, and you get about 2 months where the majority of people try to climb it. It's very visible to people in the Front Range. Have a huge population now in the Front Range of Colorado. So 14ers, bagging a 14er is a popular thing to do in this state, and as a result we have a lot of use up there. And if that use were spread out over a whole year, it would be a lot less of an issue, but since it's in about 2 months, it makes the loading on the toilets very difficult. Anyway, in 1982 this problem was significant, and we developed a prototype to work on that, and then we refined it later. So here's the areas. Boulder Field is 12,700 feet high, so for in the U.S. at least, that's very high. And then we have two other areas. Chasm Meadows, primarily a day use area where people go into the lake. Some people do stay overnight at Boulder Field, and then Chasm Junction is a way station on the way up to both of those toilets. This is what we had prior to 1982. It was just basically a little pit privy sort of thing, but the problem is in the alpine environment, you only dig down a foot or two before you hit bedrock. And also Rocky Mountain National Park's a biosphere reserve, so we didn't want to be putting the waste in the environment in the first place. So that was one of the major criteria when we started studying how to work on this problem. We came up with a fly-out bucket system that worked pretty well, but it required a lot of expense and, of course, the hazard of flying it out. With that result, about 1979, I believe it was, and after that happened, we took 2 steps back and said, well, maybe helicopter in our environment wasn't the best idea. Flying almost 13,000 feet is difficult for a lot of helicopters, and the expense and risk, particularly in our very windy and or unpredictable winds, challenging. So 1983 is the first year we had a successful toilet on, this is at Chasm Meadows, or Chasm Junction rather, and the idea was to dehydrate the waste. We created a vault. I'll just go up there. Now, this vault that collected the waste, the solid waste, liquids in a tray below. Liquids come down to a evaporator here, and it's kind of like a swamp cooler. It evaporates the liquids, and hot air from a passive solar panel goes through this area, dries it out, and is extracted by a photovoltaic powered fan. So there's another view of the original one. You can see the hot air panel, and then the vault that had that captured the solids and separated out the liquids. And then at the very top was this photovoltaic fan. Later we improved on some of these things a bit based on what we learned in the first phase of the study. These tray evaporators work pretty well if they don't get overwhelmed. It's just a bunch of swamp cooler pads. The liquid cascades down in it. You have to fill the top tray before it'll cascade over through a little drain pipe into the next tray and all the way down. If it's not overwhelmed, it'll get rid of 100% of the liquid waste that's sent down there. And you can see the pads in there, the swamp cooler pads. That's just a shaved aspen or something like that. And there's a standard photovoltaic fan that you can buy commercially. This is way back in the day before we had any protocols about the operator safe. It was probably 1983, but anyway, the vault is pulled out. It'll have the dried solids in it. If this isn't overwhelmed with visitor uses, and for us that means roughly say May and June, it works really well. It'll reduce the weight of the solids by about half. And however, in July and August, when we have the huge influx of climbers, it'll get overwhelmed and it doesn't really do much to reduce the waste. However, again, it'll take all the liquid waste out, so at least that much is not getting into the environment. And we figure each one of these can handle about 5,000 uses. I talked to the person responsible for maintaining this, and he says they're getting overwhelmed because visitation keeps going up. So either the park's going to have to build more toilets or find another solution. But one of the challenges is there's no real easy solutions in an environment like this where there's no soil, and it's about 7 miles into the furthest one. And then that waste is dug out by hand and is bagged. We use llamas because they're very sure-footed on the trails, and the visitors love them. We could use horses or mules. Some people, the maintenance workers, like those better, but because of their steel shoes, they tend to tear up the trail a little bit more, and then their waste is a little more offensive to some people than the llamas, which their waste looks pretty much like elk waste. 84, we did a second iteration of this. This actually had trays for the solids, and that worked extremely well. The waste would be collected in a tray, moved to a bank on either side, and then it got, as long as we wanted, weeks to dry it. This would actually come out like a cow pie or something you might see on a ranch after it's been drying for a year. It was pretty inoffensive and very effective. However, it was a real pain to move those trays around. The maintenance guys didn't like it, and as John said, if you don't maintain it, it's no good, no matter how effective it is. And it didn't win any architectural awards either. Oops. So here's some of our lessons learned in that first study. If you can't maintain it, it's not a solution. When you hike in 7 miles and you're working at 13,000 feet, that's difficult for most people. And I always thought this is the best job in the National Park Service. You get 3-4 hours to be out in nature, and then you have 20 minutes of misery, and then you have 3 hours to get back, and 20 minutes of misery to empty the waste, and not a bad day, but not everybody sees it that way. Marmot proof, and we'll look at some issues with that. Marmots are pretty aggressive up there. Corrosion resistant, and then we have horrendous winds on Long's Peak. I believe the record was set that we know of on the top of Long's with a anemometer that broke at 240 miles an hour. So we had the graph that showed it, and then all of a sudden it just was gone. And we'll see some slides of that. This is what the marmots can do. They'll get inside. I don't know if they're just weird or they like it's because it's warm in there or what, but they'll really desperate to get in there. Corrosion, pretty obvious. There's some of the wind damage. We had them blow over twice. So that's, of course, a big issue if you come back in the spring and it's on its side. So here's some of the solutions. We used hardware cloth over all the surfaces, then we put fiberglass over that, and that pretty well stopped the marmot issue. Everything is stainless steel in the latest generation. very expensive, but it doesn't have any problems with surviving that environment. And the polyethylene risers work really well. You can buy those commercially from Romtech. And we went up to 1/4-inch guy cables. These are 4 times stronger than what we started with. And you can see the bracing. And even at that, it still gets wind damage every year. So this is the latest iteration. Boulder Field, we have 2 separate side-by-side toilets. You can shut one down and just load one or the other and give the other a chance to rest. You can see the hot air panels there and the photovoltaic panels and the fans. And this is the one at Chasm Meadows. Lower we get and the less use it has, the more effective it is. And the evaporators, we increase the spacing a little bit to get a little more air through there. And to be successful, as we'll follow up on some of John's stuff, you have to commit to maintenance. If you don't do the maintenance, it's a paperweight. And I talked to a couple people, and you hear after 32 years of having toilets that were successful in the backcountry, I'll hear complaints, oh, it doesn't really work. I'm like, well, that's odd. It worked for the last 32 years. Why is that? Well, what they're really saying is, you know, something is broken, or we really don't want to do the maintenance on it. When I was managing a program years ago, I had a fellow that was working for me to clean them out, and he'd come back and he'd say, it's busted, it doesn't work. I'm like, well, what's the problem? And he says, well, the hinges are bad on the door. And my response is, well, get another hinge, get a screwdriver, put it back in. But, you know, I've had people that work for me that were extremely good with that. You never heard any problems because they were very proactive on that. So a lot of the success of something like this is totally dependent on the people that doing the maintenance, or somebody like Kerry Cook at North Cascades. You have somebody that's championing the program, it'll be a success. If you don't have anybody that's interested in it, then it'll tend to, or they don't want to do the work. Then you start getting the complaints about, well, it doesn't really work well. A lot of times we just don't want to go up to 13,000 feet and shovel stuff into bags and deal with it, which I totally understand, but that's what the commitment it takes. You have to dispose of dried waste. A couple of the solutions I've heard of wouldn't work very well in our environment because it's just nothing but rocks. It's called Boulder Field for a reason. And you know, some of them are like composters. You got to have a place to dispose of the waste. In our case, using a composter, I've always been kind of sour on that idea up at Boulder Field because you'd have to carry your bulking agent up, wood chips or whatever, carry that up to 13,000 feet and then take the end product out. Early in my career, I was sent to Haleakala, best boondoggle of my career, to study, actually the Public Health Service paid for this trip. And we couldn't understand why the composter at Haleakala down by the coast worked so well, and it didn't work so well in Crater Lake and Voyagers, I believe is the other place. And within an hour of being there, I knew the answer. In Haleakala, it was 78 degrees every single day. And in a place like Crater Lake, the pile froze in the winter and it wasn't successful. And the other thing they had in Haleakala, it was about 100 yards to the road, so they could take a wagon down there to have a place to, you know, move the end product out of there. Availability of replacement parts, I've had people ask if this would be appropriate in some more remote areas of the world, and sometimes I've said no, it wouldn't, because inevitably a photovoltaic panel will break or a hot air panel will get cracked glazing. And if you can't get the replacement part and get it in there quickly, it'll fail pretty rapidly. And that's pretty much true with any system. And then the skills to build specialized components. Ours are totally custom built. Most of the sheet metal work was done down in Denver. And we had built some, we built with our own crews who were interested in it, and some that were done by contract. But again, you have to have someone who can champion that, take the design and actually babysit it through the process of getting it built. These are custom one-off sort of things, so they're not all that easy to do. Again, some people find this really exciting and they'll get really behind it, and other people don't want to have anything to do with doing something new like this. And then the last one is local customs conducive to dealing with the waste. Some cultures in some areas of the world, dealing with that waste where you actually have to dig it out, and it's no different here, again, with the people you may hire. I've had people work for me that had no problem with that, and then others that were squeamish. And if you're not willing to deal with that semi-dried end product, it's not going to work. And then this is my soapbox lecture here. John, you kind of had a similar thing. It's got to go somewhere. And anything you hear in this conference, the bottom line is that product just doesn't disappear. It's got to be incinerated, it needs to be composted, it needs to be hauled out, it needs to go to a tertiary treatment plant. I don't care, sooner or later. It's one of those matters neither created, destroyed sort of things. It's got to go somewhere. So time and again I've heard, well, maybe we should use a different system. And my response is, well, what do you do in 3 years when that, like for a composter, what do you do when that vault fills up? You still have to take that waste and do something with it. If you use a wag bag system, still got to go somewhere when it comes out to the trailhead. Now it can be, in that case, you could put it in the trash like we do on river trips, in some, with the BLM. Other places, like on river trips, again, they're using a system that'll actually take it to, as we do with this product, take it to an actual treatment plant that does treat it. But the bottom line, there aren't any panaceas. You have to pay the price sooner or later. And this is where we'll go tomorrow. Those of you that are on the bus trip up the Rocky, and we can show you one of these in operation. So, do you want to say anything about the trip, Roger?
Actually, tomorrow we're planning, just for those who are on the trip or those who'd like to go, and I think we have some space on the bus. The trip will leave here promptly at 8:30. It's about, an hour and a half?
Yeah, potential for theoretically a 15-minute delay on Highway 36 where they're doing some reconstruction.
So let's assume that we'll be off the bus and ready to hike at about 10:30.
Yeah.
The recommendation is based certainly on 4 years ago experience, is make absolutely sure you bring rain gear.
Yeah.
Because we could get rained on, hopefully not, but we'll leave the parking area, hike up to a very beautiful trail through the woods, up to the toilet site, and then Joe will give us an overview of this, and we can ask him lots of questions. It is a beautiful hike. The views are stunning. You can see this is definitely a toilet with view. And then from there, we'll hike up to Chatham Lake and have a box lunch, and then hike back down. And we should be back here by...
Depends on how long we stay at Gem Lake.
Okay, somewhere between, I would say, 4 and 5 in that window.
Yeah, it's technical.
It's just strictly a hike. No technical gear required.
The water, probably, we're going to try to, Pam's going to actually buy some bottled water for folks too. If you got the water bottles, bring those. She's going to have some bottled water, plus we have some juices for the morning, and oranges too, besides the bottled water. So there should be adequate food. That way, but the liquids are the big concern because it is high elevation, it can be quite hot, and so we hope to have at least 1.5 liters or more per person going. So if you don't have a couple of those blue bottles, you might want those besides what we're giving. There's no water on the bus, no water. Is there water at the trailhead? There's no water there. So think of the water for the entire 8 hours in a long hike. So enough to keep you hydrated the whole day. So that's one of our bigger worries than anything else. And yeah, good, reasonable footwear. I wouldn't go with the flip-flops, light shoes, but good set of running shoes, hiking boots, whatever you got that.
Yeah, it's pretty rocky trail, and it's 8,500 feet elevation.
Yeah, so we're at what's 55 here, I think, or 6. But yeah, then we gain 1,000 feet in the hike. So it's a good workout too, even though it's short, it's a good workout. Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, do you want any questions before we?
Yeah, any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to know the capacity of each unit. because-
The capacity?
Yes.
Yeah, we figure they can handle about 5,000 people a year, or a season.
No, per day, suppose you have been somewhere where we have 300 people. Some people, they complain when they queue for the train.
My hearing's not the best, I'm sorry.
I want to know how that structure there, what
Oh, how it got there?
the capacity of that structure there.
On a daily basis, what would you guess?
Oh,
If it were continuous
For
use?
example.
yeah, several hundred, yes,
200.
I'm with you. Several hundred people a day could probably use it, but we clean these out every week. So, you know, you can handle a spike every so often, but we couldn't sustain that every single day.
If you want more, for Kilimanjaro, with
Yeah.
heavy trekking use, you probably want a series of them, I would think, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, like at Boulder Field, we have 2, so we double our capacity that way. This one is in an environment, and it only gets a couple hundred uses a day, and it keeps ahead of the drying. But Boulder Field now is getting overwhelmed, and so, you know, it's an issue of how many of these. The bucket's about yay by yay, maybe 30 inches square, and it can hold a week's worth of use at several hundred people a day. There was a question over here?
I had two. One was, what happens if you got too much pee and the evaporators, like you get down to the last tray? I mean, is there a backup plan?
Well, yeah, there's not really. Theoretically, it's never supposed to get to the last tray, and I'm sure it has, and it just is going to spill out in the environment at that point.
And then the other thing I had was, what was your, like, what was your discussions with the regulatory agency, since this is kind of a unique and novel?
Yeah, well, the Public Health Service funded this in 1982 and 1983, and John's predecessor, Mike, forgetting his last name now, but anyway, he was the Public Health Service officer for this region, but he was doing a national study, and we were pretty much forging our own territory. We didn't know. We didn't even know what sort of protection we needed for our workers. We didn't have any good data on pathogens, and we actually put all sorts of instrumentation in there, everything from counters to monitoring pile temperature, the volume in the liquid waste, and estimates of how much went in and how much came out and all that stuff. So it was a brand new study nationwide for the Park Service at that time. But you know, we kind of forged in our own territory there. Yeah, Mary Ann?
Can you explain briefly the job of the guys who empty the bucket and where they bring it and how they bring it there?
Their job is basically go collect the llamas. We just carry them in a pickup truck, makes it real easy. They hike up to 6.5 miles up to Boulder Field. Basically, they just, you know, close the toilet off for a minute while they do their thing. They pull out the vault, shovel out the solids into double bags, load them in the llama panniers, and you know, theoretically they're supposed to do all the maintenance up there too. And then they just hike down the trail, go back to our headquarters where we have a transfer station, and we put the semi-dried waste into the transfer station, of course, with some water, and then it goes to Upper Thompson Sanitation District, and we're paying for it, you know, along with all the rest of our waste. It goes that way. The transfer station is where we dump all our vault toilets as well.
So at the base of the train, once the waste is removed from the panniers on the llamas and you're dumping it in there, is that you as a bag or emptying the
Yeah, we just turn the bags out, inside out, and then that goes in the trash. Yeah. Oh, any other questions? Anyway, if you're on the field trip tomorrow, you'll get to see this at Gem Lake, and then we can go up to Gem Lake, and it's a nice little place. And,
Has this been replicated at any other parks?
well, it's a good question. Actually, this kind of relates back to that whole thing about commitment to maintenance. It was tried at Grand Tetons at the Lower Saddle. I don't know what that is, probably 12 or 13,000 feet there. And almost identical conditions, windy, dry. It did have the that one step where you have to use a rope to get up a little cliff. So we weren't going to be able to use llamas, so they would fly it out. But they used it for a year or two and decided it wasn't a success. And I thought, well, again, why is that? It works in our park, similar environment. But the problem was they had to go up there and shovel it out of the bucket and fly it out with the helicopter, and that's, you know, a hazard. And I don't know what they're doing now, but after they tried this system, they went back to just the plain old fly-out bucket, which is where we started prior to 1982. So,
I have an answer
yeah.
for also. There is, since the conference from 4 years ago, American Alpine Club members in Alaska, that we have a hut called the Snowbird Hut, and there's a poster but they have developed and have run for 2 years now a dehydrating toilet, similar to this at the Snowbird Hut, way above Alpine in the Talkeetna Mountains. And they haven't had a full, long period that really tested out, but there's dedicated people there that are running it, and it's lesser use, but it is a remote hut, and they're very excited with what they're seeing. And it's a very simple system. In fact, this type of system and what they did, you can build it with, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't need any big plastic components or molded units. You can build it with a lot of hardware things you'd find at a normal hardware store and install a dehydrating toilet. It's not complicated.
And they have on-site people that stay at the hut. They say that,
No on-site. They have instructions there.
oh, and it tells them how to use it.
And
Oh,
it's
okay,
just a basic
Nice.
toilet, but they have urine diversion, and that's
Yes, yeah.
that's the key, is the urine
Yeah.
diversion. And we'll be talking more about that later today.
Yeah, the urine diversion alone knocks out about 50% of the weight that we're dealing in.
And I think that has to happen if you're successful with these systems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.